Pues estamos a punto de transmitir en vivo. Estoy esperando que me salga el enlace que me dice que ya estamos transmitiendo. Así que voy a esperar un ratito más.
En mi
I'm
pantalla.
gonna switch gears. Okay, yes, so we're live on Facebook. Hi, everybody. My name is Paola Betchard, and I'm a senior worker rights advocate with the Worker Justice Center of New York. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you to Julia Coburn. She's with the Center for Immigrants and Rights. They have offices in Mexico. She's right now in Mexico City, and they also have an office in Washington, in the United States. Last week we had a session that was in Spanish, and I generally used to speak with Julia in Spanish and Julia in Spanish. So this is going to be our sort of like a different way to communicate, but we're very happy to do this live chat today. Thank you, Julia. For me, you're Julia, so for being here. Please, can you introduce yourself and can you let us know what do you do? What's your role at your organization? And we'll start with that, and then we'll describe a little bit of the H2A program.
Thanks, Paula. And yeah, it is kind of funny to be speaking with you in English and to be talking about the H2A program in English in general. Typically, like you mentioned, I'm based in Mexico and usually are talking about these issues in Spanish, but it's a really awesome opportunity to be here and to be sharing with everybody who is following. So CDM is our organization, Centro de los Derechos Migrantes in Spanish, Center for Migrants' Rights in English, and we work binationally. We accompany migrant workers, H2A workers, H2B workers, all different types of workers on issues related to labor rights in the United States and also in the recruitment process in different countries of origin. So I'm the Director of Operations for CM here in Mexico, and I also coordinate the Migrant Women's Project as well. And I've been doing this on and off since, largely with CDM since about 2008. So in different capacities in different parts of Mexico and different parts of the US.
Oh, thank you, Julia. I'm going to keep calling you Julia. So we were talking about, and it's important for us to do this also in English because as we know that there's a lot of folks coming from Mexico to work in agriculture here in the US, and we are in New York State. We also have a big Jamaican population that come every year, and actually they've been coming even before than the Mexican workers. So some of the Jamaican workers that I know have been coming for more than 30 years. And actually, I know some folks that their parents work as H2A workers, and now the second generation of H2A workers are still coming these days. So it's very interesting to hear the stories and what they have to say about the program and how it has evolved over the years. And I wanted to show you all a very short video that's 2 minutes, and it's about the program, and it's about the program in the 70s in Florida. And some of you might find this similar of how the program is or right now in present time, but also in the past. And as I said, there's different generations that have been coming as H2A workers. So I'm going to attempt to do a share with my screen, and I hope you will all see. And we will start the video. Can you see?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop the sharing. Let's see, stop sharing. Okay, good. So that was just a very short preview of actually a very interesting documentary done many years ago to document the life of workers from Jamaica that came early on with the H2A program from Jamaica. So you can see how this has changed, and maybe in some ways it's similar. And that was when they still used to go to the sugarcane plantations, and later on with the machines, that work was not required anymore. So then the work shift to other crops and other types of work. But anyway, so I also like to share that the song that was introduced to me by other workers, and I hope if you're watching, I hope that you will enjoy this conversation, and people from the Wayne County and also people from the North Country, actually in Peru, New York. There's big camps with hundreds of workers down there. Our organization generally works there, and I personally used to do a trip up north and go visit all our friends there. But unfortunately, right now we are under these new times in the pandemic. We are doing work remotely. That's why we are finding these new ways to communicate. But we are still working, and we encourage everybody to reach out to us through our social media, and also look up. We have the page, the Worker Justice Center page. It's a good place to look for us, and you can also find me on Facebook. And anyway, so thank you. And now I'd like for us to talk briefly about the program. So what's the H2A program, and how do you see it from your perspective, Julia?
Yeah, so you mentioned changes, and I think that's an interesting place to start. I think that one thing, at CDM, we've been working on visas and labor rights in the H2 programs for about 15 years. And one very noticeable change in recent years is just how fast it's growing, particularly in the current immigration context in the United States. There have been a lot of incentives to kind of grow the H2 program and reduce other types of labor on, our traditional labor and agricultural industry. It's harder and harder for undocumented folks, for example, to work. And there's, like I mentioned, increasing incentives for employers to use H2A program. And for us, I think we've noticed that, as this program has grown, unfortunately, sort of the resources to enforce workers' rights and the state of workers' rights in general hasn't necessarily grown in comparison. The Department of Labor, for example, doesn't necessarily have enforcement resources to be able to inspect workplaces or to address complaints. There's still a lot of vulnerabilities in the program. So that's why at CDM, we spend a lot of our time, talking to workers about the importance of knowing your rights as kind of a first step to be able to defend those rights. And one of those first steps is knowing your contract. And so I know we've been talking about sort of what are the elements of those contracts, and there are a number of those. And I think that everyone, well, maybe if it's your first time, may not be familiar with what a contract is, but there are some fundamental rights in the H2 program. For example, every worker should get a copy of a contract to have and to hold. That should be yours. You should be able to have it, and should be able to. It should be in your language that you can understand, and it should have information like what are your work dates. It should have information like who you're going to work for, the name of that employer who's going to be on your visa. Very important, because sometimes there's different chains of kind of supervision or different companies subcontracting in the H2A program. So knowing, who your employer is and who's going to be that employer on your visa is very important. That person is going to be responsible for making sure that those rights in your contract are respected. The duties that you're going to do at work. So what kinds of work specifically beyond just agriculture, what types of specific job like work are you going to have to do from what time in the morning to what time in the evening. So you can know how many hours. Yeah. The housing employers in the H2A program have to provide housing, free housing to H2A workers, at least offer it. It's not required that an H2A worker live in that housing. H2A worker can choose to live somewhere else, but employers have to make that available at no cost to workers. Where that housing is located too, you should know, where you're going to live, what's the address, be able to share that with your family members. So that should come in that contract or that job order.
And in that, the part of the housing, I think it's important also to mention that depending on the farm, each contract has very specific, it shows very specifically what type of amenities you're going to have in the housing. So the type of housing, either it's like a labor camp, barracks, or a trailer homes or a house. And if you're going to have cooking utensils, if you're going to have meals provided, everything is there in the contract. So you have to be able to look at it and know what's expected from the employer.
And specifically as well, one of the most important parts of that contract is your pay rate, what you're going to earn, whether and how you're going to earn that. So are you going to be earning by hour? What is that hourly rate? And make sure that we'll talk maybe in a little bit about how we make sure that that's an appropriate rate. And then if you're also or instead going to be earning by piece rate, maybe by bucket or by kind of the amount of product that you're harvesting or planting.
Generally in here, like many folks work in the apples. New York State is the second larger producer of apples in the country after Washington State. So there's tons of apples. And generally, depending, so at the beginning of the season, folks might be earning per hour, but then as the season progresses and there's the harvest starts, then it's a piece rate. So it depends on how many bins they are able to collect. And so we always recommend to keep track and keep records of your day, of your hours, of the number of bins that you collected, because that will determine your pay. And also to be able to double check with that your pay stub reflects the actual number of hours that you work and the actual number of bins that you collected. Because sometimes we say all are humans, and even if there's people in general that counts, there are people that sort of like supervise and counts or look at the hours, but sometimes people can make mistakes, and so it's important to have your own records and take care of your pay stubs, because your pay stubs are the only way you can prove that you're working with this employer, and that if anything happens, you have the proof and you have the information that you need to. Maybe they forgot to add like 2 hours, or they forgot to add something to your pay stub. So it's important to keep your own records.
Absolutely. That's a really great tip. And we've seen some people sometimes get really creative with the way that they keep track of hours. Sometimes it's hard to know what time it is. You're working, and maybe you don't have a clock around or a phone. But there are other ways, or folks holding each other accountable together, or no sé de acuerdo, like at the end of the day, kind of talking with others to make sure everyone has an understanding of the hours that everyone worked. And it's especially important if you're, potentially earning by hour and by piece rate, or it could change, piece rate values. No matter what the piece rate is, you should always earn the base rate, the hourly minimum wage, whether that's the adverse effect wage rate, which is a special agricultural wage rate.
Right. So in that point, in New York, the minimum for H2A workers is 14.29 per hour. So you can earn more, but not less than that. And that's also, well, and for me, when I am with Jamaican folks, because you have at least the language, although some people sometimes, personally me, not speaking English as my first language, I know that the many of us have different accents, and I've seen some people just don't understand, and until you get used to somebody's accent, it's just okay. I tell people it's okay to ask, just repeat and say it again. But Jamaican folks, you speak English, but some people that come from Mexico or other countries that don't speak English, it's more difficult for them to know and to ask questions. But many times, and there's also some people that are local workers, for example, here, and I tend to tell our Jamaican friends that if they see someone that it's locally, and they might be immigrant workers from local living all year round in New York, for example, they should be earning the same wage, the same amount per hour. And sometimes we've seen cases where the H2A workers are making 14, the minimum wage for H2A workers, but the others are earning less, which because the minimum wage is less and federally 7.25, so it's even less. But if they are doing the exact same work as any H2A worker, they have to be paid the same. For me, it's important to say that because I hope that there is a sense of solidarity among the workers, and to help each other, even if you don't speak the same language. Even, I know many cases where people try to communicate and they actually build friendships, which is very nice to see. We used to have, again, like this year has, like COVID-19 has reshaped many things, but we used to have a harvest festival here to serve like as a welcome and as a way to thank all the farm workers that are local or that come from other countries to help to just do all the work of agriculture that otherwise we wouldn't be able to have apples, or we wouldn't be able to have the food that we eat every day. So that festival, we used to have DJs, like one Jamaican DJ. There's DJs from the workers that come. So I will be missing that this year. We will be missing that this year. But I hope that you are working safe and that we get to see you at least from social media, the ones that are friends on Facebook. Please don't be shy. So yeah, so anyways, it is, for me, it's really important to talk about this sense of solidarity among workers, and that you really get to understand your rights. So I don't know, I think I was trying to say something else, but I will go back to it. So anyway, so yeah, you can continue. Thanks.
Yeah, and you brought up COVID, which has changed the way that everybody in the world is living and working right now, really, or it's at different levels, changing the way also that we're thinking and approaching our relationships and our work. And with the H2 program, there have been, some particular concerns that I think we feel in particular a lot of authorities haven't adequately addressed. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is create opportunities to share information increasingly online, digitally, or through WhatsApp, on Facebook, about sort of what are the risks of COVID and what can folks do to take care. Particularly in, I think, the H2A program, we know that folks are often, traveling in close quarters, sometimes, flying on airplanes, and sort of that long distance travel and exposure to different types of people can be particularly risky for transmission of this disease. And we know, that sometimes a lot of times people can transmit the disease without having any symptoms, without knowing at all that they're sick. And that the best, way to protect is wearing a face mask, protect yourself, but protect other people, to use, hand sanitation and maintain social distance. But one thing that and the social distance recommendation is, kind of 2 meters, 6 feet. But one thing that we are hearing is that this social distance recommendation is really about social distancing. It doesn't necessarily apply for like sleeping conditions. And we know that a lot of farm workers are sleeping in 6 feet away from each other or less, and that actually 6 feet may not be safe for sleeping, especially if you're sleeping without a mask on. And that is something that's very concerning, and that the more distance folks can make, if possible, the safer that everyone will be. But just to keep in mind that sometimes what we hear that applies to the general public may not be the same, offer the same level of security that we might need in the workplace or in our housing conditions.
And that raises a lot of issues for me and for us as an organization, because we know that, we always knew that farm work was essential, right? But now we know that these are essential workers, and yet they are taking a hard risk. It's very risky and dangerous. We already know that agriculture is the second most dangerous industry in the country. And we know that there's a lot of levels of exposure to repetitive motion that some folks just at the end of the season, just many have been not able to finish the season because of back pain or neck pain, or some have been exposed to pesticides and had to go to the emergency room because they fainted in the fields. We know that many folks have here, there's this machines called harvesters, which are platforms where they getting to harvest apples from the trees. And some of them have had accidents with the falling from the harvesters. So we know that, and we know that that's very risky. And that, in a way, for me, is it's telling of who is benefiting and who's not benefiting, and why we have to keep fighting to get better working conditions. Because I don't think nobody has to die or to be sick in order to feed your family, and it's important to have a dignified work for everybody.
Absolutely. And I would ask, actually, Paula, if in terms of improving working conditions for everybody and for farm workers in particular, New York took a big step last year with a new bill, farm labor bill. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about sort of what impact that might have on H2A workers in particular, if any.
Yeah, thank you. So that was part of what I wanted to talk anyways. So we are very happy that one of the good news that we had in the recent years, it's the pass of the Farm Worker for Labor Practices Act. That there's been like more than 20 years, have been many advocacy groups in the region, in the state, have been advocating for these changes. And basically, what it says is that you are going to be able to have overtime payment after 60 hours of work. Also, the right to unionize, the right for collective action, and be protected when there's concerted activity, which is very important as well. In the past, workers actually, in part of these laws respond to things that happened in the past. And we know a case of workers that they met with a worker center. They tried to organize to get gloves and masks because they just personal protective equipment, and they were fired. And so that even that action of gathering a group and saying we are getting injured at work, we want some improvements, it wasn't, you could do that, but if you were fired, you didn't have any way, the law didn't protect you. But now it's protected as any other industry in the country. It was really it was called like these agricultural exclusions that unfortunately farm workers had, and I think based on the times from the slavery times, which some people might say that the H2A program is still sort of like a modern slavery, which yes, it helps, and it's a base of a source of income, but at the same time, there are many in many ways, I agree that this is still a way of profiting from workers from other countries, from people of color, and in fact, I think so many farm workers that I know from H2A and from many countries, they often say that they pay taxes as any person, but what happens if you get injured? Yes, you can apply to workers' compensation, and that's a right that you all have. If you get injured at work, you can apply for workers' compensation, but then you can also, technically, the workers' comp board can send you your checks to Jamaica or to Haiti, to China, right? But it's harder to access these services, although we have some successful cases. But still, you don't see the fruits of your work, and if you get injured, you have to go back. The H2A visa doesn't give you a path to citizenship, or you cannot bring your family and enjoy, or your kids don't go to school here. There's so many limitations to the program, even though, as I said earlier, I know some of you have been coming for many years. Your parents came as H2A workers, you came as H2A worker. I remember one of the people I met through my work. I met this person because he was injured, and he was really badly injured. Of course, he was fired after he got injured. So, it was a retaliatory action from the employer, because he applied for workers' comp, and on top of that, he was exposed to pesticides, and he was very concerned. He really went through all the processes, because he told me that his father died after many years, when he sort of like retired, and the doctor said that it was because of chemical exposure, and so he was very concerned. He didn't want to go through the same. And so he was a person that was very diligent into wearing the personal protective equipment, and yet he was still going through all these hazards. So yeah, so it's important to know the rights. It's important to keep fighting, and I think these new laws that we had, in a way, will be able to protect and benefit the workers. If you want to create, and we at the Worker Justice Center, we have so we do a lot of education, this type of education. We can do workshops, and we can talk about how to create a health and safety committee. Because if there's just one person that is asking about these issues, or saying, oh, this is too risky, or maybe we should take a break because it's raining too much, and there's a storm coming, and it seems too dangerous, or if it's too dark, and you can't see anything, there's no lights. There's so many things that people tell us. Or if it's too violent, if you've been called names, and that shouldn't happen, that's workplace violence. That's also a hazardous, and it's a public health issue. And if you are facing all these things, you should be able to join in solidarity with your co-workers, and be able to ask for better conditions and not be retaliated for that. So that's good things about these new laws. There are also other things about. It used to be that there was an exception for small farms for workers' compensation. Although people in the H2A program, they all have, you all have the right to have workers' compensation, but it was the case that locally, some local workers, if they work for a small farm, they didn't. But now there's no exception. Yeah, so I think that's I would say those two big things for you. There's the right to a 1 day of rest. That was also a big thing, and believe it or not, that was still a thing. Like, we are in 2020 and people still, farm workers still didn't have the right to ask for 1 day off if they had to. Like, some people, we know stories of people being fired for asking to go to the baptism. There was the baptism of one of the daughters and they couldn't attend, and I said, well, there's no way I'm missing that. And so they didn't go to work and they were fired after working like 10 years. And so anyway, so I think those are the main good news in a way that we have. So there's I don't know if you hear my neighbors. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I don't know, are there any other things that you can share with us about other rights and other tips that folks can use on when they come to the US to work?
Yeah, and actually talking about the changes in New York is a really good reminder to everyone. If there are folks who are listening who maybe work in other states or thinking of working in other states, have family members working in other states, a lot of H2A workers, H2B workers, other foreign workers who come to the US with a type of visa receive like a pamphlet that just says, these are your basic rights. Here's a phone number to call if something happens. And those are typically kind of just the summary of your federal rights, right? In the United States, we have different types of laws. We have federal laws like Paula mentioned, and we have state laws. Sometimes we even have local laws, municipal laws. And getting to know your state laws is really, really important because they could be stronger than some of those basic federal laws. And some states like New York, some states maybe like Oregon, especially in this context, California, Washington too, have certain protections afforded that other states don't. They may also have higher wage rates. For example, Paula mentioned that the wage, the adverse effect wage rate, which is sort of that minimum wage for agriculture workers in New York, is, what did you say, is
14.29.
29. There are some states like Washington whose wage rate is above $15. And so it's good to know that, right? Just to know sort of what you're entitled to, and also to understand additional protections that may be available, for example, around workers' compensation. Another important right that H2A workers have that not all workers have is the ability to access free legal help if something happens. So there's a network of organizations called that are called legal services organizations all around the country that can help H2A workers who have questions about potential violations to their rights, and will do so for free. And that's not the case for all workers. Like H2B workers, for example, don't necessarily have access to those legal services. So that's a really important thing to know as well, because we also sometimes hear from workers that their employer, and this isn't the case for all employers, but employers sometimes try and tell people that you don't have any rights here and that there's no one here to help you if you do something, make threats to that effect. And we do want people to know that no matter what people say, yes, you do have rights. And just because you have a different type of visa doesn't mean that employers can do whatever they want to you or tell you whatever they want. So that's a very important resource.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very important. I was thinking about other rights that, especially people from Jamaica, and many times it comes to taxes, and that's a tricky issue because we don't have a lot of people and a lot of organizations here that provide that service. but I think it's very important because workers go back, and then some of them are not back by the time you have to file your taxes. So that's been an issue and a question that we are still trying to, get a better sense in the community. There's people that do that work here, and some folks do the taxes, but there's that's certainly something that it's lacking, and I think it's a need that exists and that we know and we recognize about that. I don't know if there's something else, Julia, that I'm not remembering.
Oh, taxes is also one of the top questions we receive, and it is one of, like, we also, I think, are in the same position, that it's very challenging and it's very local. So we have attorneys on staff who can assist with wage and hour issues, labor issues, but tax law can be really, really specific and quite complicated. So we tend to refer folks to VITA clinics, which is a type of low-income tax assistance network. They often are operated out of universities or community centers, and they operate during certain times of the year. So it's not necessarily a year-round service, but and there are sort of lists of VITA clinics that offer different language assistance as well. So we do tend to try and help folks locate a service that would be helpful to them in their area. So that is one resource to know.
Yeah, and we have, there's different clinics that are like that. Yep, and then there's Cornell University that provides that service. Something else that I wanted to touch on is OSHA rights and what happens when you get injured, and also because we have COVID-19 happening, so how that might affect workers. I know that. Well, I also, Worker Justice Center can help folks do anonymous complaints with OSHA, and also the Department of Environmental Conservation if it's pesticide related, and it's any other hazard, it's OSHA. But I don't know if, Julia, you also have some information that you can share from you.
Yeah, I think it's really key to talk about sort of OSHA. So OSHA's well, we could talk about different OSHAs, but there's the OSHA, the federal national agency. It's like the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, essentially, that is responsible for kind of overseeing occupational, workplace health and safety measures. It also has the ability to receive complaints from people who are concerned about health and safety risks at their workplace. So it doesn't have to necessarily be an accident or something that happened to you personally. If you observe, so they're basic, I think fundamentally everyone has the right to some basic health, to work in a place that is safe and healthy. I think there's different opinions on exactly what that means, but for farm workers, for example, basic access to clean drinking water, access to shade and rest, access to, there's some regulation on pesticides, et cetera. And being able to access as well certain tools to be able to work appropriately, work under safe conditions. And workers who are concerned that their workplace is not safe, maybe because they're being asked to work without certain safety measures, without certain training, without certain equipment, can make a complaint to OSHA about that, and OSHA can, in theory, send inspectors, and that complaint can be anonymous, that Paula mentioned, which is not always the case for other types of complaints. So it is important to know that. There are also sort of state level health and safety agencies as well, in some places that offer that kind of assistance too. I would mention that I know sometimes anonymous complaints are not taken as a high priority or as high as a priority as a complaint from a worker who gives their name and is an affected party in their workplace. So I would just flag that. if for folks thinking about whether or not it's worth making anonymous complaint or not, is to kind of weigh how the agency might prioritize or respond.
Yeah, and in that respect, I think that sometimes when there's folks that plan to retire, that plan to not come back, we always say, like, if you were fearful, because many folks are very fearful, like we talked about this last week as well, that many workers are fearful to complain or to say anything because the risk that they won't be hired again the next year. But if you're planning to not come back, that would be a good opportunity to be able to talk. I mean, it should be okay to talk anytime, especially if there's something really dangerous and risky and that that somebody could even be hurt badly. But if if you don't plan to come, like, and if you can be that person that can help the group and help others, it would be important, because it's always the complaint has a higher priority if somebody that is currently employed is complaining. So yeah, it is very helpful. And there are whistleblower protections, because how I see this is that you are protecting. It's not that you're a snitch. It's not that you are just not, it's not really going against the employer, because I think that if in the workplace everybody is healthy and everybody is working, there's no accidents, it's better, because there's many studies that show that people that actually saves money to have people being healthy than having to have other people that feeling for the ones that are sick, or that the cost of workers' compensation, all those things. So it's really in the best interest for everybody to just have a healthy and safe workplace. And in the case that you are sick and that you know that something happened to you at work, it's important that as I said before, to apply for workers' compensation. And you have 2 years to apply for workers' compensation. That's also important. Some people, for some reason, we've seen that many people are also fearful to apply for workers' compensation. And for good reasons, because some people have been fired because they apply for workers' compensation. But generally, it shouldn't matter. It's just using your insurance like any other insurance. And in the case, it's always important that you write to your supervisor or whoever it is. That generally some companies have an incident report or something that you can file, or even a text message to your supervisor, whoever that person is. That's important. But I know also some workers' compensation attorneys, they are able to, depending on the case, sometimes even if you don't have that, you are still able to get through the process, because you can prove that you were working and that it was actually at work. I also know some other folks that, well, there's different clinics that are rural clinics, but also occupational clinics, that I think it's very important for folks to know that those clinics, that there's a network. Especially, I actually don't know, I assume there are in other places, but in New York, there's a network of occupational clinics that have the capacity and are trained. These are occupational doctors that can see you and that can give the best recommendations for things that happen at work. So that's good to know. And if you would need to ask whatever doctor did this so first, if you need a second opinion, or if you are convinced that you are still not well, and it's important to see an appropriate doctor and make sure that you tell them that what's your work, because also what we've seen is that when folks go to the doctor, and sometimes they don't even ask, what do you do? But I think that's a very important question, and make sure that you know also that the workers' compensation applies not just for an accident, but also when, for example, an occupational disease is something that you got from working in the long term, because it's easy to see in the short term you broke a leg, and so yes, an accident, but what happens with occupational disease. And that's something that unfortunately it's in the longer term. So either some folks have developed cancer, some folks have developed other diseases that you could still apply, and it's a way that you can have access to healthcare.
Yeah, and I just to reiterate, this is one of these areas of law that is very specific to every state. So it's hard to make a lot of kind of generalized recommendations about what to do, but some of those general recommendations for a workplace accident, injury, or illness are to notify your company as supervisor immediately. Paula mentioned in writing. If you can't, or if there's anyone around who might be a witness to what happened, kind of take note of that, or see if that person could help even provide a statement if you anticipate it might be difficult, or your employer may not want to take responsibility. We always see cases of employers, even though Paula mentioned that this isn't insurance, like the employer isn't necessarily paying for the accident or the hospital cost or medical care out of their pocket. Maybe their insurance rates will go up if they have a lot of accidents on their record, and that's something they want to avoid. There are also employers who are supposed to have insurance and don't have it. So that's a problem. But your employer doesn't have to be the one to contact that insurance company. You do need to tell your employer that as an important first step when you're supervisor. But if they don't want to help you, you can then go directly to the insurance company. And if there are attorneys, workers' compensation attorneys who are specialized in this area of law in every state, who can provide assistance, for example, if the insurance claim is denied. Sometimes we see employers who lie and say to the insurance company investigating the accident that the worker hurt themselves, not at work, because these are specific to workplace injuries, right? I think Paula and I were talking on the call last time that for whatever reason, we often hear employers alleging that workers got hurt playing soccer, which is very ridiculous allegation, but or employers may tell folks, oh, don't worry, you should just go home to your home country for a little while, get better, and we'll just wait whenever you're feeling better, come back. And we'll use that opportunity then to cancel the visa or to not bring that worker back, to fire that worker, or tell that worker that they're no longer entitled to any kind of compensation because they're in another country, and those things are not true. So one thing we do recommend is if it looks like your employer is trying to get out of their responsibility, to try and contact an attorney. We at CDM do help connect people with attorneys. We try our very, very, very best to find folks who speak the language of the person. Sometimes we also help facilitate those interactions if there is a kind of language barrier. So we do take that very seriously. Do encourage folks to reach out if you're having any trouble with a workplace accident.
Yeah, and same here. Worker Just Center represents workers at no cost. Everything is confidential. And we've been doing this work for more than 30 years. Worker Just Center used to be called Farm Worker Legal Services, and then we merged with another organization in the Hudson Valley, and we became the Worker Just Center of New York in 2011. So we have a presence in the Hudson Valley region, Westchester area, it's closer to New York City, and then we are sort of like Western New York. Our office is in Rochester, but we really cover all the state. So as I said before, we go to the North Country, we go to all the counties and areas that you can be in. And we know that there's a lot of people in the North Country, especially the area of like Peru, New York. We know that there's many people there. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us now through our social media. It's easy, and if you're seeing this, please feel free to comment or contact. We recently, actually, now that you mentioned, Julia, about the new laws, the Farm Worker for Labor Practices Act, that we had solidarity caravan, and throughout the state we went. It was on May 31st, because that was generally what it was called Albany Day, where everybody would go to protest and ask for these laws. And this year it was actually to say thanks, to thank. Of course, there's many things that we still have to do. It's not perfect. Yeah, we still are missing many rights, especially also in the H2A contract. We know that there's a COVID, like we know that some people now are fearful to say that they have symptoms, because they fear that if they tell their employer that they are sick, they will be sent back, or that they will be fired, or what happens if you are in quarantine. And so in New York, you have certain rights. So you have access to paid sick leave if you are sick with COVID-19. And that applies to every worker. But we know that there's been cases of people that have been fired because of COVID. And we know also some workers that don't want to be farmers, that don't want to be in the public eye. And because it's sensitive, it's the food that we all eat. So some of them might feel like it's not good for them to say that there's COVID. But we've seen some outbreaks here. There was one big one in Madison County in a nursery. So we are worried that that can happen. We know that ideally folks would would be tested at the arrival. We know also that that's not we don't have any laws that say that you have to, but that would be the best practice. New York State developed guidelines for agricultural settings. So the farmers, they have to have a safety plan. And even though these are recommendations, guidelines, and they don't have to certify it, but in the case, so you can do also a COVID complaint. So if you see that you don't receive masks, or you're not able to keep the 6 feet, the 2 meters to work, or if there's no washing stations to be able to have the appropriate sanitation, you can still also file an anonymous complaint, and we can also help with that. At the end of the day, I think it's very important to get treatment if you are sick, because we also seen that many of people that work in agriculture and other essential jobs also happen to be people of color, and also happen to have more factors that will increase the risk and the severity of the sickness. So it's important to get medical help, and if that's COVID related, everything is covered by the state. But we also know that it's very difficult. So reach out. We tell everybody, please reach out if you don't know what to do. Of course, it's important to call the Department of Health of the county where you're working. If you don't know how to get that information, please reach out to us as well.
And I think I'm mindful of time, but I did want to touch upon there's, I think, 2 big questions that we get regularly about the H2A program. In particular, right now, we're getting a lot of them. One of them is this question of retaliation, right? And this fear. What if the idea that speaking up could mean some kind of punishment, like firing, maybe getting, I've heard other types of punishments, like being benched for a week without pay, or demotion, or reducing pay rates. There's all different ways that punishment can take place. And what we do say to folks is, everything is a personal decision. And if we know everyone's kind of taking into account what is best for him or her in their particular position, but sometimes, and a lot of the time, I would say, actually speaking up, making a complaint, looking for help is the best way to protect yourself against retaliation, because retaliation for defending one's rights is a protected in many cases an action, and retaliation is illegal. So if an employer were to take an action against somebody for defending their rights, for example, for health and safety reasons, for wage and hour reasons, for example, maybe cooperating with the Department of Labor on a wage and hour investigation, there may be more protections against retaliation in those particular cases for someone speaking up than for staying silent and continuing to suffer some kind of rights violation, which in itself is a type of punishment as well.
And it doesn't matter your immigration status, which I think is important also to keep in mind. It doesn't matter if you have a visa, if you don't have a visa, it doesn't matter.
And like Paula mentioned, a lot of these the services that are available, legal services or other types of help are confidential services, right? So they're at CDM, at WJCNY. You can talk to somebody anonymously if you want. Well, I would just speak for CDM, but confidentially, attorneys cannot share information with employers without your consent, nor would they. They're folks that are there to help protect you and to work with you and help you understand what your options are so you can make the best decision for you, whether that is taking an action, what kind of action, what those different types of protections that may be available for you in your particular situation.
Thank you, Julia. I don't know, at this point, I think we are already at an hour. I thought we were going to have a shorter,
we get to talking, Paula.
I know. Well, we can certainly, we get some other questions. We could keep doing this, but please let us know if you have other questions, and we will be happy to give any information that is needed. So again, I'm going to say thank you very much, Julia, for joining today and talking about this work that is very important. And I would tell you, everybody there listening, I think these are strange times, difficult times, but I hope that we will change our ways that we've been doing things. And I hope that we won't get back to normal, but really find a new normal that really it's more mindful of what we do, how we work, ways that are more gentle in a way to ourselves, to nature, and that we appreciate more than ever the work of people that work in agricultural in the world, really, because without you, we wouldn't be able to have food, and that's a fact. So thank you, everybody, for working and for taking such big risks sometimes in order to do the work. I know that you deserve the best, and we as a society, we should learn to really make sure that everybody working agricultural is working under safe conditions and earning a dignified and wage, so you can have a dignified life with your family. And we will be here and we will keep working for that to happen. So thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.